Hello there, my name's Stephen Hall. I'm one of the four principal speakers of Left Unity. I want to explain why I think we should be voting to remain in the EU on Thursday. It was interesting to watch on TV earlier, broadcast from the Leave campaign, where the main slogan was taking back control, obviously emphasis on our borders, but also our sovereignty. And the idea that somehow if we pull out of the EU, the whatever £350 million a week it's costing us to be in it will somehow miraculously be diverted into the NHS, and that somehow that by staying in the EU the NHS is going to deteriorate, when the reality is that I think is it up to a third of the people who work in the NHS weren't born in this country, and but for them would be in a state of collapse. Immigration, as I've said before, is a good thing, and without it, in the last period, it's the financial crisis 2008, you can be pretty well assured from statistics that without immigration during that period, Britain would currently be in a recession and we'd be in a worse economic mess than we are in at the moment. Contribute, was it 2.5 billion per year? So this idea that somehow immigrants are a drain on the NHS, the reality is they're actually contributing £2.5 billion a year. One thing I'm concerned about is, obviously after the referendum result is known, is that those of us on the left, whatever position we've taken on the referendum, we will need to be coming together to resist the heightened xenophobia and racism in society that the referendum campaigns generated, and likely to exacerbate if we do vote to come out, in my view, and likely to be a festival for all the most reactionary forces in society. In fact, that's what's concerned me throughout this referendum campaign, is that a section of the left, with a normally correct analysis of the EU, which I would generally agree with, should be sticking to the idea that we should be withdrawing under all conditions, under all circumstances, when for me, the idea of us doing that is just simply ridiculous. 5 years ago, if you'd asked what was my view on the EU, would have said, let's pull out because it's a boss's club, a reaction institution that's about promoting neoliberalism, privatisation and so on. But that's not the position I'll be taking on Thursday, when I'll be urging people to vote to stay in. That vote to stay in and encouraging people to do that won't be based on any exultation of how great the EU is for anything, because I don't believe it is. But at the same time, I think it was absolute folly for us on the left to be supporting that, when the only possible outcome is going to be a negative one for the left. The outcome is unsure. Polls showing all types of possible outcomes, whether we vote to stay in or we vote to come out. This referendum campaign has certainly heightened the hostility towards immigrants and promoted xenophobia and racism, and we should be all concerned about it. Across Europe, it's quite clear to me that if the result is one of coming out of the EU, that most people on the left, as well as society generally, will see that as a big move by Britain to the right politically, and Britain becoming more hostile to Europe, European integration, working and cooperating with other countries in Europe, and that, in my view, will be an expression of reality. And it won't be people across Europe saying how great it is that the SWP or the Lexit campaign have done in building up support for their case, because their case is basically not being heard in this referendum, and it's quite a nuanced, sophisticated argument, which is not what the average person there on the street is talking about, where the main concern is one of immigration and its threat on the NHS and various other things, which of course are all spurious arguments being put forward by the right-wingers in the Brexit campaign. Following the results of the referendum, if it's a vote to leave the EU, it won't be Peter Taff or Alex Kallinikos who will be being interviewed about what they think about the outcome. It'll be Boris Johnson, people like Michael Gove, Nigel Farage, who will be gloating on TV saying what a great, wonderful result this is for Britain and its fight for freedom and so on. And festival for all the most reactionary forces in society who oppose not just the EU, but any kind of European integration, work with Europe, and basically anything that isn't white Anglo-Saxon. As far as I can see, the outcome of this referendum is not going to be a progressive one. It's not going to be one favourable to the left. In fact, it's going to result, if we decide to come out, in us being on less favourable ground than we are now. And even if we do vote to stay in, we're still going to be faced with similar problems of heightened racism and xenophobia, has been shown in recent days of campaigning. And of course, the extreme example of which was the murder of Labour MP Joe Cox by a guy who yesterday in court said his name was Death to Traitors and Freedom for Britain. You can imagine the type of freedom for Britain he'd like to see. One of the things I'm concerned about is obviously the situation that EU and non-EU migrants are likely to find themselves in after the result. I think the situation isn't going to be enhanced. It's certainly going to be more precarious than it is now. And what the potential results might be in terms of their entitlement to stay in this country, and obviously not just that, but all these so-called expats we have in Spain, what's going to be the future for them, and all the workers and people living in other EU countries, what's going to happen to them, because these are things that concern me and lots of other people. Obviously, in terms of workers' rights, we're being told how great it will be for workers' rights if we come out of Europe. Well, personally, whatever the criticisms people might have of EU, and I certainly don't lack those myself, I can't see how we're going to be altering privatisation by coming out of the EU when the government's committed to it, including for the NHS, railways, and when it's not really into supporting workers' rights either here or anywhere else. So the idea that somehow things are going to improve for workers I find laughable, and certainly in terms of helping the NHS, well, that's a complete utter joke. I also find this idea of taking back control to be something of a joke when you think that, was it 2/3 almost of the electorate of this country who did vote, voted for other parties than what we've ended up in power, how that's taking back control. It's a minority who are in power, and yet we seem to think that's all right. Personally, I'd like to see a fundamental root and branch transformation of our electoral system, proportional representation as such, and if people were telling me take back control and bring PR to Parliament, I might take them a bit more seriously, but this idea of taking back control is in complete utter bollocks. It's not about taking control, it's about pointing the finger at immigrants and the EU as being responsible for the mess we're in as a country, which has nothing at all to do with the EU or immigrants, and has got to do with the ultra-rich, big corporations, banks and so on, basically trying to rob us blind, make us pay for all the inadequacies of the system and for the cost of the bank bailouts and so on from the 2008 period. Nothing at all to do with immigration. And in fact, what gets me is how we have employers in this country who go out their way to places like Lithuania, Poland, other countries in Eastern Europe, to recruit people to come and work in Britain. Do that because they believe they probably have less knowledge about what the laws is over here, what they're entitled to do, and health and safety and so forth. And then after doing so, turn around to people in those areas and say the reason you're out of work or in low pay is because of these people who've taken your jobs, which is absolute hypocrisy, but does highlight the type of people that we're dealing with. The big concern, of course, though, is this idea that somehow white British people have more right to life, to an economic social existence than anyone else, and that somehow we're full up as a country. That doesn't have to upset me, that type of view. As someone who agrees with Gerard Winstanley's idea that the earth was made a common treasury for all, which means wherever you live or wherever you want to live on the earth, it's still a common treasury. And seems to me, that people have the right to move about and right to work wherever they are. And if we address that issue, that there's plenty of jobs to be had, and we can have full employment in this country if the government put its mind to it. It just would rather perpetuate the idea that the reason we have unemployment and low wages or whatever is because of immigration. Sadly, not everybody's as well informed as what I am and other people, and we seem to have a lot of ignorance. And certainly, we do seem to have lost our way in terms of being a Christian country. I'm not a Christian myself. I used to be, but no longer. But I do find it somewhat ironic that after we sang songs like, Jesus died for all the children of the world and so forth when I was young, that basically it seems if you're not white Anglo-Saxon, you can go and get stuffed. Something that's obviously mirrored in America. But I'd like to appeal to people, especially on the left, to reconsider whether they think it's actually tactically wise to be campaigning for Brexit at the moment on a nuanced position that's pretty sophisticated in terms of the electorate's concerned. Most people aren't concerned about TTIP or privatisation at railways. The main thing that's driving this campaign is immigration, threat of immigration, and really that's the ground that we're fighting on, and not one of forward to a socialist Europe and so forth. Although obviously we need to work across Europe with others who support that idea, and one has to wonder how on earth people think that we'll be in a better position when, with Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson celebrating us having come out later this week. Personally, I think that's a disastrous scenario. But one thing's for sure, whether you agree with that view or not, those of us on the left who oppose racism, xenophobia, who are standing up for workers' rights and against the undemocratic nature of this government and what it's doing, need to stick together and campaign together. So that's certainly something we need to do, whatever our view on this referendum. But I do really ask people on the left to consider the wisdom of supporting a position that is very much a minority one in terms of the people who are campaigning to leave the EU, and is objectively assisting what is in effect a right-wing agenda and racist right-wing politics. That's a fact. We can't get around it. So on Thursday, I'd ask you to think again and to vote to stay in the EU. That's not because I think the EU's good in any respect. I say on another context. So, for example, Jeremy Corbyn be elected as Prime Minister, you can be damn sure the EU would be an obstacle under those conditions to him. But now's not the time for me. It's almost like turkeys voting for Christmas. That's what it is.